What a pleasure and honor to be here again at the World Government Summit and with so many leaders and dynamic key innovators in sustainable development. And I especially want to thank the government of the United Arab Emirates and the tremendous work of the government in implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. And we just saw the generosity described of the UAE in efforts around the world. I think the largest donor as a proportion of national income of any country in the world. And so let's give a round of applause for the UAE. The spirit of zakat as a fundamental precept of a decent society is a very profound idea, and it is an idea that should be understood and shared in the whole world. This country lives that spirit, and the reflection of the commitment to leadership in sustainable development is really an inspiration for the whole world. And I hope that we can make zakat understood and known in all parts of the world as fundamental to achieving sustainable development. What is sustainable development? Of course, it means integrating three fundamental objectives: economic well-being, including that everybody's basic economic rights to health, to education, to social protection are achieved. Second is social inclusion, that our societies are fair, that they are fair to women as well as to men, that they are fair to minority groups, that they are fair to indigenous populations that have faced such horrendous discrimination and worse all over the world. And third, that we are environmentally sustainable in our practices. This is the core idea of sustainable development. It's not only a good idea, it is an absolutely necessary idea, because we have reached a paradox in our world. The world is rich. We have reached an era of affluence that is astounding. If you look at the average income in the world, the IMF now puts that at about $18,000 per person on the planet when measured at international prices. The world economy is now about $135 trillion for the 7.6 billion people on the planet, an average of about $18,000 per person. This is an astounding success of humanity when you think about even recent decades, much less a century or two ago, when virtually the entire world was in extreme poverty and the average income per person on the planet was a fraction, a tenth of the current level. And yet, despite this affluence and success, we're certainly not achieving sustainable development, not even close. We have still roughly 1 billion people trapped in extreme deprivation, despite this average level of productivity in the world. And that is a paradox, and it is, of course, a kind of shocking neglect. How can people be struggling for survival? How can millions be dying of poverty every year, which they are because of lack of access to the most rudimentary health services, the most rudimentary provision of basic infrastructure such as sanitation and clean water? How can hundreds of millions of kids be out of school when we have such affluence, when we have such technology to enable every child to get a decent education? So we are rich, but we're not meeting the challenge of sustainable development. And we are, again, paradoxically, destroying the planet and even the basis of our well-being through environmental catastrophe. And we're so far unable to change course, even though this has been in the awareness for decades now. In truth, it was probably only in 1972 when the first glimmer of the environmental scale of crisis was first made aware to the world. That was the first ever UN conference on the human environment in Stockholm, and it was the publication of Limits to Growth, which first gave us the inkling that the growth of the world economy under its prevailing technologies would collide with the planet's fragile ecosystems. But then in 1992, 20 years later at the Earth Summit in Rio, it was absolutely clear the collision course was already in train and that we needed to head it off, with 3 major agreements reached then on climate change, on protecting biodiversity, and on stopping the spread of deserts, something you know well in this region. 3 big treaties reached. What did we do with those 3 treaties? Nothing. We adopted them, we ratified them, and then literally we did nothing with them for the next 20 years, which is why the Rio +20 conference 20 years later in Rio was the most depressing meeting I've ever been at. 20 years of treaties, 0 results, moving fast in the wrong direction. More greenhouse gas emissions, more global warming, more spread of desert. Look at this region. The surface waters have disappeared. Sandstorms everywhere. The air quality, catastrophic in many parts of this region, 20 years later. Biodiversity being destroyed everywhere. Maybe some species, 1 member of the species still alive, 2 members of the species still alive. We watch them before our eyes disappear. So we did nothing. And that's when the government of Colombia stood up and said, we need goals that are clear, sharp, focused for the world to understand. And that's how the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals came about. The governments spent 3 years defining them at the UN. They started with a draft list of 300 goals, got them down to 17 in those 3 categories of economics, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability, and ratified them on September 25th, 2015. And then a few weeks later, December 12th, 2015, the same 193 UN member states adopted the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, what are we doing about those? Possibly the same thing we did after 1992. The United States has a government and a president committed to going in exactly the opposite direction. Every day, deregulation. Every day, more fossil fuels. Every day, more irresponsibility. Every day, anti-zakat. You're on your own. No charity. Foreign aid cut off. You don't agree with us, we cut you off. That's my government. And it's not alone in this. And so are we really going to waste all of this science, this technology, these breakthroughs, this know-how, this productivity? Are we really going to lose it all because we're not smart enough to manage success. We're not facing failure, we're trying to manage success. But too many people are drunk on wealth, they're drunk on power, they're drunk on Twitter. And so we're not managing this. It's unbelievable that we can't figure out how to move in the right direction. We don't even need heroism, by the way. We need basic rationality, not heroism. We're not asking for sacrifices of half your income, half your wealth, nothing like that. A tiny proportion will be enough for safety on the planet. Do you know, every study, I'm engaged in many of them, generally coordinating people who know what they're talking about. I'm an economist, that means I don't know anything specifically. But I know climatologists, I know energy systems engineers, I know public health specialists. My job is to find smart people, help them to say smart things, and then to tell you what they say. And what they say is that for less than 1% of our output, we could reorient the world economy to a zero-carbon, wholly renewable energy economy worldwide. It's not that it's going to break the bank. It's not that it's unaffordable. It's not that, oh my God, we don't know what to do. And do you think we don't know what to do to get kids in school? It's not so complicated. It requires some classrooms, training some teachers, some basic facilities with running water, with toilets, with a screen, with connectivity. There's nothing magic about it. We just have to decide to do it. So what is really missing in this story? I think that there are probably three main points that are missing. And they all relate in a way, oddly, to my country, which is really a weird place. Because the United States is the richest country in the history of the world, the most powerful, and yet we're falling to pieces. And so it kind of shows wealth isn't everything, power isn't everything. It can turn you crazy, actually. And that's a bit what's happening. So one of the things that happened in my country was that at the end of the Cold War, they said, we won. We won the Cold War, now we can do anything. And one of the dumb things they said is, you see, the Soviet Union had central planning, so planning is bad. So the United States proclaimed the idea, never think again. No more planning. When's the last time you saw the US government plan anything? Honestly, I mean that literally. We were speaking about the United Kingdom having green papers, white papers, planning. The UAE has planning. The United States doesn't even have more than a tweet now. So the first thing to understand, please, is you need planning. Absolutely. Not central planning that controls everything, but planning your energy sector transformation, planning your healthcare sector, planning your education sector. These don't just happen by themselves. Markets don't solve these problems. That's a big misunderstanding. This needs long-term thinking and planning. And the Emirates exemplifies this. Where would the Emirates be? Of course, markets, yes, but without planning, hopeless. Without the infrastructure, the strategy, the vision, the forward-looking, impossible. So this is the first thing that we're running up against. And I really want to emphasize this. There is a US ideology, libertarian ideology. It's a bunch of nonsense. It says we're all free, we're all on our own, don't tell us anything to do, and don't plan. And this is the first point that I want to emphasize. The SDGs require planning. Take them, look at where you want to be in 2030, and then get integrated assessments and understand that markets will play some role, but government has a fundamental role to play. By my count, there are 6 basic transformations needed to achieve these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. The first is the education systems, educating every child for the future. That requires a lot of skill development, that requires curriculum development, that requires integrating online technologies, that requires building classrooms. So that's transformation number 1. Transformation number 2 is the healthcare sector. SDG 3 calls for universal health coverage. That is a planning exercise. The United States is trying healthcare by markets. It's absurd. That's healthcare by monopolies out of control. So the drug prices are 100 times too high, for example, because we turn over everything to the private, profit-driven monopolies. You need a public health sector, universal coverage, properly planned. The third transformation is to zero carbon energy. This is really, on the one side, tough for this region, which is the world's center of hydrocarbons, but on the other hand, also feasible for this region because you're the world's center of sunshine. So this region could be a powerhouse of the global clean energy. And you should be developing the solar not only for yourselves, which can easily be done all solar, but also for massive exports to the rest of the world, which require high voltage direct current lines to the European market, to Central Asia, to South Asia, to China, to Africa. This is feasible. This is the new economy, but it definitely requires a strategy. You're lucky you have IRENA right here. You have Masdar right here. You have the greatest sunshine in the world right here. And so this is really a feasible transformation. The fourth transformation is sustainable agriculture and food supply. This is a big challenge for this region as well, because if the world food markets go haywire, that is huge vulnerability for this region. And there are many, many problems and also many solutions. And here's Andrea Illy, one of the leaders of the world coffee industry and the greatest coffee company in the world, so we can thank him. And I know that every time he sees me, Jeff, what are we going to do about sustainability of coffee and that sustainability of the food and agriculture sector of the world? The fifth big transformation is to sustainable cities, because that's where most of the world is going to live by far. We're already at about 55 to 60% of the world population in cities. It's going to be 80 or 90% before we realize it. And that means that we need to plan infrastructure, services, efficient transport, autonomous driving, new shared vehicles, public transport, walking, clean air. By the way, you can look on the map any day, as I did just an hour ago, to see the Clean Air Index, AQI. And today, all over this region, the quality is not very good. Said if you're vulnerable, this is a bad day. If you look in Delhi, it's disastrous in Delhi. In Iran, Tehran today, terrible. In most of China, the eastern part of China, terrible. This also comes to Jack Germain's point about data. We could have real-time SDG data for the whole world, just like we have for the air quality. Every day you could look up the poverty rates, literally, by using satellite mapping of satellite lights. You could look up deforestation every single day. You could look at the surface water cover. You could look at many indicators every day if we get organized to do it, which would really be a very good feedback. And that brings me to the final of these transformations, which is the digital revolution, because digitization provides fantastic opportunities and tools for governance and for solving the Sustainable Development Goals, but also the digital revolution provides huge risks of loss of privacy, of surveillance, loss of freedoms, whether stolen by private companies like Facebook, which is taking your data and mine and using it to make their markets, or by governments that are doing it. And we need to solve this problem so that we have the tools that are positive and effective and not the ones that are dangerous to our well-being. So 6 big transformations, each of which needs planning, foresight, thinking ahead. That's really the first of these problems that I think is key. Second, that is a big challenge, is nationalism. Because this agenda is inherently a regional and global agenda, not a single country agenda. And we need the regions working together. And that's not happening right now. America First is not exactly a slogan of sustainable development. It is a bad 19th century idea that got us into trouble a lot of times. The last thing in the world is any country first. No. It is cooperation, rule of law, and regional integration. I was speaking this morning about Brexit. I hope it doesn't happen. I want Europe to be able to function as Europe. This is extremely important. I want this region to function. The idea of one more war in this region is just horrifying. One more war and there's no sustainable development in this region, period. And anybody that thinks that the right strategy is to put Iran on one side and Saudi Arabia and the US allies on the other side is not thinking straight. Because this is one region, and if there's any more conflict, you're finished in terms of achieving well-being. How many conflicts do we need? Most of them caused by imperial meddling over the last century. And by the way, the problem is, since we're the 100th anniversary of the Versailles Treaty, the war to end all peace, as it's been called. Because with the end of the Ottoman Empire came nothing but Western meddling. British, French, and the United States. And each side said, well, as long as we have the powerful one on our side, we'll be fine. We can beat our next door neighbor. But believe me, the US strategy is divide and conquer. It is not to help one side or the other, it's to divide and conquer. The region has to work out its problems. Tell the big powers, go home. Arabs, Turks, Persians know how to live together. It's your region. The big powers are the myth. They don't care about your region. They care about your ports, they care about your oil, but they don't care about you. And so we need the regions to be functional. The idea that India and Pakistan can't talk to each other is unbelievable. How can you solve problems in South Asia? So all these divides were made by European imperial powers. And the United States idea is empire, believe me. I know it, I'm just telling you. I don't need to tell you, but I'm telling you. So this won't work. This is past the age of empire. There's no more hegemon. There's no more world leader. By the way, I'm not at all worried about China becoming the world hegemon. That's ridiculous. China's going to have a median age of 50 soon. Old people don't want to be hegemons. They want quiet life. I know it. So we're not in a world of conquest. These are old ideas. We need to be in a world of cooperation. So this is the second main idea. And the third idea, and I'll just end here, we really need to be in a world of zakat. We need to be in a world of charity and justice. You can look up any moment the wealth of the world's richest people, okay? It's on Bloomberg website. So you can Google right now what Mr. Bezos is worth or what Mr. Gates is worth hour to hour, because they calculate it based on their stock ownership and the stock price and so forth. Last time I checked, which is a couple days ago, Mr. Bezos was worth $140 billion. Mr. Gates was worth $96 billion, and so on. If you take the 2,208 billionaires in the world, ranked by Forbes magazine, their combined net worth is about $10 trillion. 10 trillion. I tried to work it out a few days ago. What is the cost of living for a billionaire? Suppose you need your 5 mansions, you need your private jet, you need thousands of dollars of daily expenses, you do everything. It actually remains true. You can get by with just $1 billion, by the way. It was a relief to see. So you could scrape by with just $1 billion. So in a way, everything above $1 billion is superfluous. I know a few people that get by with less than $1 billion. But you could make it with just $1 billion. So if you took everything above $1 billion, that's about $8 trillion. Do you know what you could do with $8 trillion? You could get every child through quality upper education on this planet. You could ensure that everybody has every economic need and more. You could make sure that everybody has health care. You could make sure that everybody is connected to the world, that everybody is participating in the world. That's 2,208 people. We have no problems that we can't solve if we put our minds to it. Why does your neighbor need to buy $100 billion of new military equipment from the United States, which my president says, jobs, 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 and I can assure you there are better jobs for Americans than to make military equipment to blow up this region? You don't need it. What would $100 billion do for the Arab region? Phenomenal. Absolutely transformative. With the ideas in this country, with the culture of this region, with the values of this region, with zakat for the world, by the way, with Islamic finance that would not have destroyed the world economy in 2008, by having some basic standards of decency, which we forgot a long time ago on Wall Street. What could we do for the world? So thank you. Let's get on with it.